Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for people to join today's meeting. You are in Auditorium 4. This is going to be the feedback on the W3COGC workshop meeting that we held. So that's what you're here for. I'm hoping that one of the main speakers will get in soon. So give it a couple more minutes and we get started. Where's Bill?
He went for lunch.
You went for lunch?
With Alex.
With Alex. Oh, good. Who knows till they can go and look for him.
Observation 75 East.
Is everyone familiar with the Wi-Fi password for today? Observation 75 East, all lowercase. Not that I encourage you to start doing emails, but they are keeping me in suspense here. Building up tension. Sorry? No, I'm good. I was just
Okay.
no, we're in good shape. Actually, there was a volunteer that
we didn't get lunch. We ordered it, and we left before it arrived.
Oh, really? Oh, well.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Bob, for
No worries.
I mean, Karen wasn't
being
there.
good.
No worries. Yeah, I was warming up the crowd. All right. So good. Thank you, everyone, for joining the meeting today. We'll be reporting back from a W3C OGC workshop that we held beginning of March, 5 and 6 in London. It was hosted by Google. Thanks, Ed, again for having us there. This was an initiative that came both from W3C and OGC, which I think is very valuable for our community. We have most of the program committee here today. I also see some folks that were present at in London as well at the workshop, so that's really good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you through the 2 days of content, what the outcome was, and then what both Phil and I took as action items to both standards development organizations, W3C and OGC, and how we want to move that forward. We have an agreement in the making, and I think it would be good that we go through that and sort of collect your feedback on that as well, appreciating both W3C policy and procedures as well as OGC's policies and procedures. I'll be taking notes and we'll be reporting back. We're gonna time box this one. We have to stop at 3:30, so I'll be watching on time as well. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Phil, who will talk us through the 2 days. Are you ready, Phil? Yeah. You have slides you wanna present?
Yeah.
I have the website up if you want.
Okay.
More than happy to pass it on to you. We also have a GoToMeeting running. I might have some remote participation. Hasn't logged on yet, but I'll keep the line open.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm an alien here. I don't know you, and most of you don't know me at all. So it's weird. I was in a session this morning that Bart's colleague Athena was running, surrounded by people talking about stuff I don't do. We worry about HTML. We worry about JavaScript and CSS and web components and RDF and XML and things like that. And really, you know, it is the reason for being here is to try and make those connections with a different community. Obviously, I know some of you, but you know, there is a gap between the way the web works and the way that the geospatial ISO TC 211 OGC world works, and that's what we're trying to do something about. So yes, I'm not going to take you through in detail what happened across 2 whole days. That would be pointless, but just give you a little flavour of it. The number of pictures were taken at the event. Ed was the photographer, so we had some presentations, and we had some questions from the floor, and we had some panels, and we had some more breakout sessions, and people checked their email. You know, it was the usual kind of thing. And as Bart says, I need to thank Google particularly for hosting it. My participation is part of a project called Smart Open Data, about which is another session directly after this one in this room. Alex Cody, many of you will know from UK Government, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and John Goodwin from Ordnance Survey and his colleagues. So that was that. I don't really care, you know, personally, but there we are. Okay. So let's move on. If we wanted to try and summarize the 2 days in one picture, it's this one, which is SVG, by the way, which is really good scale effectable graphics standard you might want to use. And Franz Nibber from Geodan created these characters, Miss Globe and Mr. Q. This is most of you, and this is me. And we have to try and work together. So for those who, and you may not have seen that, green, orange, and pink logo, that's the Semantic Web logo. So that's the linked data world and the geospatial world. And trying to put those two together and bring together not just the technology, but also the culture. The fact that most of you I haven't met most of you, and most of you won't have met my colleagues at W3C and other people who go to W3C related working groups. So we need to try and bridge those gaps. Now, most of this session will be taken up with Alex and Ed leading a discussion on the document that came out of this, so I don't want to take a long time going through this in detail, but just to give you a flavour of the kind of issues that came up during the sessions. Let's switch the Wi-Fi off altogether, we'll stop doing that. Okay, so, because I work for the World Wide Web Consortium, I want you to use HTTP URIs as your identifiers. And if you use anything else, that's second best. UUIDs, GUIDs, DOIs, all that crap, non-functional, pointless, useless. Use an HTTP URI, and then we can actually communicate. Now, they need design. You need to think about it. You can't just slap any old URI down, and you certainly can't use your content management system to create one or whatever. You actually need to plan to do it. But you can, and they work really well if you do. But if different people create URIs for the same thing, well then, how do you handle that? How do we actually get different people who work independently to work together? And so that was one of the issues. Another issue that came up a lot was, well, I need something really simple. I just need to know where I am, stick it on a map, and the job's done, or where this POI is, stick it on a map and the job's done. And that, for some people, certainly for front-end developers, is all they ever want. They don't. A front-end developer couldn't care less about your SDI. They just want to know, where's the map, where's the thing, thank you very much. But other people in your community, of course, you need a lot of detail, perhaps. You may, in some extreme cases, need to know the provenance of every single coordinate pair in your polygon. Perhaps a map of Ukraine comes to mind as a possible use case for needing to do that. So how can we handle those different levels of complexity such that different levels of your industry can work fine, and developers can get the simple thing that they need at the end of it? And something that I hadn't realized, but the geospatial people in the room quickly told me, is that time is a coordinate reference system itself. And people are trying to explain to me why you cannot define a period of time by giving the beginning and the end. Apparently that's not good enough. You've got to have a beginning and a goodness knows what. I mean, for me, time is quite simple, but it actually isn't, I realise that. We had the BBC there, we had libraries and other people like that. Location applies to a lot of things that are nothing to do with points, lines, and polygons that we talk about all the time. I want to keep this short. We talked about the whole point about linked data. The thing that linked data does better than geospatial is the linking between one thing and another, as the name suggests. It's about that cross-silo. It's getting data from multiple places and putting them together. So this is why linked data becomes important when you're trying to put together heterogeneous data sets and giving APIs to people who can do stuff. And Alex is one of the people talking about how do you handle mixing official reference data with social media data. That's important in things like emergency handling, all sorts of things can be really useful, and for news reporting as well. And we also had some discussions about some of the tools that are available, and services and projects. There was a memorable moment when somebody was presenting a very good project and provided some very good services. And the question from the floor was, so what's your plan for providing your services after the end of the project? The answer? Get another project. That's it. That's the only way people have to sustain their services, is to keep writing Horizon 2020 project proposals and keep the money coming in. Other people were saying that some of the large-scale standards aren't always implemented fully by the software that's available. So there are a number of issues there around how can you build something that's going to be long-term, that's going to do the job, and so on. And I was reminded in that discussion about a book I read some years ago by Richard Dawkins called Climbing Mount Improbable. And in it, he talks about a number of things, but one of the most memorable sections is about this thing. This is a spider, as you can well tell. And it has 2 really good eyes at the front of its head, and it has 6 more ancillary eyes around its body. It has a really, really good, well-developed, highly evolved visual sensorium. And it's nothing like the one that you and I have. It doesn't have full-color stereoscopic primate vision. So if our eyes are better than the spider eyes, maybe there'll come a day when a spider will begin to evolve full-color stereoscopic mammalian eyes. Never going to happen. Because every step on the evolutionary path between this, which is pretty well evolved, and what you and I have, is a backward step. You'd have to go back from being a really highly evolved spider, back down the evolutionary chain, each of those steps getting worse and worse and worse before you could then start on the path that would provide eyes as good as ours, or perhaps something even better. The point about this is that the geospatial world and the web world are both very highly evolved, have a lot of systems already in place, and anything we do in that environment has to improve what's already there, not try and ask people to accept second best for a while. There are lots and lots of standards in existence already for all this stuff. So many standards you don't know which one to choose. For example, if you want to describe a location using an RDF-based vocabulary, well, here are 4 that are available for you before you start. Geospatial, which is the OGC standard, which is very good and implemented widely, but some people don't like it, so they came up with Neo-Geo instead. It does things slightly differently. Many years ago, Dan Brickley spent an afternoon writing the WGS84 lat long altitude vocabulary, which is good for a lot of people. It does the job fine. And the European Union's ISA program wanted to do something else, and Andrea and Michael and colleagues at the JRC helped us put together something called the ISA core location vocabulary as well. So even just one simple thing, we find multiple standards, even from the one community. And how do we handle that? In the final session of our workshop in March, the chair of that session, who many of you will know, Stuart Williams from FE Morphics, asked a bunch of people what they wanted, and this is the result. And what came out most strongly was, we need people to give us normative guidance on what we should be doing. Normative guidance can be hard, but that's what we want to try and do. And in doing that, what we really don't want to do is to create yet another standard. If you work for a standards body, I don't know if you've seen this one, Bart, but there's a very famous, in my world, very famous XKCD cartoon that has somebody saying, there are 14 standards, I don't know which one to choose. And someone says, well, we should have one standard to replace them all. Great, now I've got 15 standards. What do I do? We have to try and avoid that happening. So, briefly, this is what W3C is doing. Bart will, I'm sure, be able to tell you what OGC is doing. These are the things that are already happening in the web world that we don't need to think about here because someone else is doing it. So, we have a working group on CSV on the web. That's converting tabular data to other formats. It's giving data types and column headings and row headings and metadata about the world's most popular data format, well, simplest data format as well. That's being co-chaired by Jenny Tennyson, who is Technical Manager of the Open Data Institute, and Dan Brickley of Google Schema.org. The Data on the Web Best Practices Working Group, which is the one I'm most closely involved with, is trying to develop the ecosystem of data on the web. Some open, some closed. How do you put it on there? How do you publish it? How do you provide the metadata? How do you consume that? And that's doing some work to extend existing vocabulary around description of data sets, data quality, update cycles, and so on. There are other ones there that I probably just need to highlight. The Lockout Community Group, that's the one that Michael and Andrea co-chair. That's picked up the ISA core location vocabulary, and any development will happen there. Don't talk about that. But the outcome of the project, which is what we're here to talk about today, the whole reason for us being here, is that what came out of the workshop very clearly from everybody, and everybody that we've spoken to has been positive about this, is that we have to work together. The only way that we're going to bridge this world between Mr. Cube and Miss Globe is if the highly evolved, very successful, we don't need you, thank you very much, GIS community, and the highly evolved, we don't frankly need you, and what the hell do you mean PNG, why don't you use an SVG for your map world? We're somehow going to get together, and this is what we're going to try and do. So, as Bart says, behind the scenes, there's a negotiation going on between us to establish the rules of the game, but the important thing is that we are planning a joint working group. We have a pretty good idea who the co-chairs of that working group are going to be. At least one of them is in the room now. So I'm going to ask Alex and Ed to take us from here and talk about what we think already the working group, the joint OGC, W3C working group will do, and how we're going to achieve that. And I'm personally most concerned today about what you think this group should do. And then, when relevant, of course, Bart and I can step in with, well, yeah, that's okay, or it's not, whatever. We have to try and marry up the processes that we do. But we are both organizations determined that we can do this. There's a lot of goodwill on both sides. That's what we want to do. So, Alex, if you want to take over from there, we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So this is going to be interactive. And I just got to...
It's already on.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to...
Here.
Right. Okay. So these are just to kind of help remind me of some things, and Ed and I haven't practiced anything here. So this is going to be an interactive session, so we're going to just kind of... Real, yes. So we're going to kind of step through some... a little bit of kind of an introduction to kind of how the charters work within the W3C process, but also kind of step through really in terms of the kind of template as it is at the moment, and see if we can kind of draw out some of these things, get some agreement, and identify what potentially are some of the kind of priorities and sort of early next steps, quick wins. So just in terms of mechanisms, just kind of be clear, we've had some questions already during the last couple of days in terms of the kind of discussions that have been going on between the two standards bodies. Is this is going to be something that's going to fit under the W3 processes, but membership can come from members of either of those standards bodies, so you don't have to be a member of both to be involved. So that's,
But we do prefer it if you are.
yeah.
Just to show of hands, how many are a member of OGC in this group? I think it's most of them. Any other W3C members?
So this is what we're talking about, okay? But just in terms of kind of finding the scope, so there's a document, and these slides will be available afterwards. There's a link to the kind of the sort of charter document, and it's kind of laying out really in terms of what the scope of the working group is. I'm not going to read it here. Phil's kind of covered it, but important one is the what's out of scope. So really, we're not looking at geospatial and map rendering technologies. So that's just worth noting, because certainly on the day, the 2 days of the workshop, I mean, it kind of blur inside a little bit
It did.
during the
Would it be
discussions.
specific there and say that we don't want to develop another standard as well? Or is that preemptive?
There are some partially standardized things that we want to complete the standardization of. If you call it a new standard, okay, but we certainly don't want to replace 4 standards with a 5th one that does what the other 4 already do. Yeah. And actually, just to be clarified, part of this out of scope thing is about we are not trying to take over what OGC does, or vice versa. That's okay.
So this is kind of a little bit of background. So in terms of deliverables, and I think this is, Phil, I mean, it might be worth particularly seeing the few numbers of kind of existing members of the W3C is we're talking about really 2 types of deliverables, and there's notes and recommendations within the W3 process.
Okay, so a note is our word for a document that a working group produces that you're free to look at. It will always be there. And yes, you can use it, but we don't guarantee that anyone ever has. We think people have, probably, but it isn't a standard in the sense that a recommendation is. To become a recommendation, it's similar to the OGC process. You have to prove that it works. You've got to have at least 2 independent implementations of every feature of that standard. So everything you see that has the WCC recommendation on it, and similar with you, I know, then you're guaranteed that it will work. And it's a high bar.
Natural vocabulary is what you call a recommendation in the OGC standard. No, it's be very best practice. Best practice document. Yeah. So this is this sort of matching that.
Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
Increase some of it.
But we do have some best practices with our recommendations because we can prove at least 2 independent people have followed all the best practices.
Standards, eh?
Right.
So
we need to standardize.
yeah.
Yeah, standardized, yeah.
But in terms of some of the things that are already on the kind of draft document at the moment, they'll be being referred to as notes and recommendations. So that's the reason for reminding, or at least informing on that bit. So something, and this is probably something that Ed will be reminding us as we go through this repeatedly, is these need to be achievable, and they really, and in that I also mean realistic, and they also need to be things that the community wants. And these kind of sounds obvious, but it's really important, and that's not necessarily always what was being discussed within the workshop. So that's kind of reminders to everybody, and we should be thinking about what's the priority now. So what's an urgent thing that we should be working on first, and what might be slightly lower priority but is really important in kind of coming next. And I will be asking a little bit later on in terms of what are the quick wins that come out of that.
It's a good point. So
Yeah.
we can prove initial success of the collaboration. I think that would be really, that could
Yeah.
be like low hanging fruit. And not practically looking like the bigger goal.
A successful first date.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are things to kind of think about as we go through. sorry, I'll just kind of step back and be really awkward here. So just in terms of, so there's the write-up to the report, as Phil talked about, is listed here. This is what we're talking about. So this is the kind of draft charter. On it, it's got a section, as all these things do, and that describes the deliverables. So that's really what we're talking about now. And these are the kind of broad ones that are on there. And we're going to go through these in detail. There's a lot of detail behind particularly the second one. So this is the kind of list. And I think before we kind of start, I think Ed's going to kind of pick through a little bit of this, but this is an important one, and really this is kind of, we'll come back to, but initially, like straight on the floor, are there any obvious gaps here? And particularly reminding that list that Phil talked about earlier of if something is already happening somewhere else, that's not a gap, it's what, in terms of for this working group. So
it might be a better idea actually just to say a few sentences about what each one of those topics are. Because probably, you know, in this audience, time ontology now is probably not equally meaning. So
I was hoping you wouldn't do that. Okay, yeah, no, that's a fair point. So I mean, in terms of we're starting at the top. So I mean, one of the things that came out of all the discussions, as Phil said earlier, was around really trying to identify end-to-end journeys, that kind of best practice and requirements piece. So that's one that's under the note, and there was an awful lot of, I think a lot of the desire within the room was kind of focusing on that aspect actually. In terms of geodata and the web best practices, so that's really the one that's listing some of those specific implementations and standards that are either kind of there that need sort of formalising, need finishing off. Then there was, and then really the kind of next three really were focusing on the sort of broad communities, particularly in that kind of well, represented by people here, where there are particular problems, where there are actually kind of gaps at the moment, and that's either there's multiple different options and there's nothing that's been sort of bottomed out, or there are kind of sort of there is nothing at the moment. So time ontology in ours, this is really in terms of talking about in the kind of linked data, kind of data on the web way, is describing time. Semantic sensor network vocabulary, again, there was quite a broad discussion around that. There was a number of presentations. Coverages in linked data, so particularly that was around the problem of having very large volumes of data sets and the challenges of how you would expose that within a linked data way. That's not necessarily presuming that you would be looking at putting all of it within a triple store type environment, which there have been examples of, but more how you would link together potentially the way that coverages are done at the moment in the more traditional OGC way within a kind of linked data environment. So those are kind of focuses. So before we kind of move in to the discussion, is this list sensible?
Yeah, just wanted to ask folks, you know, who's familiar with the IDF I had one, common vocabularies is one of the answers.
I think we had, yeah.
Anyway, but that you know, we could take that, like the semantic sensor network vocabulary.
I mean, I think from, you know, the sense I get is that really the first two there, use cases and requirements in the form of a note, which is describing what's out there and making sure that we are all talking the same language in the both communities, and that there is, and this is kind of a fundamental point, that there is a benefit from both communities on coming together and doing things together. I think that's proven by those use cases and requirements. Where does taking a semantic web, RDF, more traditional web view of the world help the geospatial community? And where does some of the knowledge the geospatial community brings help the web community in doing, solving the problems that we have? I think those are addressed by those use cases and requirements. From that, I would guess directly then leads to geodata and the web best practice. Where you say, look, here's an example where by using RDF to describe the structure of this particular data set, suddenly becomes more useful, more accessible for this community. That would be a great next step. I think the others are a different use case. They're more complex. They require a higher level of knowledge and understanding. And I think from the geospatial community, they are talking about things that we are less familiar with. And I think we need to do more work probably to understand those. That would be kind of my take.
Actually, we did address most of these topics last week at the committee meeting where the use cases were presented at the geosemantics working group. But also in final voluntary was brought up a net ocean by the net ocean. So within the geodesy community, these topics
We went back to time ontologies. The TC211 group on ontology maintenance is producing SCOS outputs of all the concepts that have been defined by TC211, so that will cover a time ontology. So at least by the time the group gets to that version of the TC211 group is doing the same thing but from their own angle.
We don't know what that SCOS is. Does everyone know what SCOS is? SCOS is a way that we encode thesaurus, thesauri, and terms in what we call concept lists. But it's a thesaurus in linked data.
And it's increasing, I think Ben's correct, I think it's by certainly TC211 are recognising that we've stepped back from defining our own way of describing these objects and let's use SCOS. The definition of what a geospatial thing is from the geospatial community, how to express that definition on the web.
I get a sense, because you're all here, that there is a general perception that there is something of value, there is something that benefits, this is mostly geospatial community, that benefits the geospatial community from a lot of this W3C like technology. That actually the case. We're all okay with that. It will mean, it means us doing more work, and it means us perhaps doing things in a slightly different way. We're not talking about a massive evolutionary step backwards, as Phil suggested, but it does mean doing things a bit differently. It's me bringing now.
Oh, I'm not in control of that, no.
That confused me. You were looking over at the ringing. How did you do that? Okay. So,
Big data.
easily data. So I think we're okay with the, I think probably getting together and starting to build those use cases and requirements, becoming the best practices, the recommendation, which will then encapsulate. I don't know. My take on this is I'm going to be, I guess, a bit of a naysayer, a bit negative in many of these things. I want to see this in practice. The last thing I want us to end up doing is sitting down and writing lots of documents that just gather dust. That doesn't help anyone. And what we need to be able to do is, as Bart suggested, very early on, get demonstrable benefits. Say, by bringing together these communities, by looking at the cross-pollination of these technologies that were developed in different places, we can bring benefit. And that benefit, I guess, is only going to come if we can identify those real concrete problems that we can solve by using these technologies or by these approaches. We're not doing this as an academic exercise. We need to be doing this to deliver services that citizens will be using in the future and that they will benefit those citizens by those services being there. So any kind of candidates, we're talking about in the right sort of descriptions here, any use cases out there at the moment that we could identify as kind of early things that we could look at, that we could document, that we could create notes around?
I'm going to call on Jesus. Could you, in 2 minutes, give us an outline of the pilot study that we're doing in Smart Open Data, and why linked data you think might be better than what you can do already without it?
to the answer using this kind of technology, using this,
You got some technology to
linking
use
this
to do.
information. This is the aim of our project, as I explained in a few minutes. I have answered.
No. But you think you can answer some questions more easily,
Yeah.
and perhaps some complex questions more easily? Not that you can't answer them already, because you can. It's quite obvious that the spider can see very well and a primate can see very well. But it might be the spider with primate eyes might be even better.
Yeah.
So we've got to get there.
This is the point. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if it works. Okay, it works. Yeah, first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Martin Tuchina. I'm from Slovak Environmental Agency, and actually I'm partially involved in the project which will be presented in the following workshop. For your question, Phil, I think there are two use cases which personally I see as a main drivers why I am quite interesting to see this development. First one is actually how we will be able in a relatively easy and simple way link geospatial data we are somehow taking care from environmental perspective with some additional geospatial content and functionality which is made available at this moment, not respecting, for example, the paradigm brought by SDI concepts. So this is the first case, how to link the data which currently is very difficult to link together, spatial with spatial, spatial with non-spatial. So the first use case. And the second use case is actually how to create some added value on top of these linkages. So actually to came with some new products, with some new knowledge, which it's a question whether we will be able to solve it with current technologies, with current paradigms, current approaches, and actually really to provide some evidence that this direction has some significant benefits. To spend some time, because really I have to say from my subjective perspective it's quite new domain. So far it seems to be quite complex, but there seems to be something behind. So we have to first of all identify it, touch it, and then sell it. I mean in positive way.
Let me respond to that. I get used to the data is complicated all the time. And if you wanted to be accounting, but let's face it, it's as simple as it can possibly be. This location here has name and there's a string at the end of it that's a name. I mean, a lot of it's really, really simple. Which again goes back to what level of data do you need. If you're a developer doing something at the front end, you couldn't care less about all the detail. You just think that's JSON. That's all you want. So there are things that are complicated. Yes, it can do complicated things, but it can also be quite simple.
Maybe we go back to the very fundamental. What's the proposition that a linked data approach gives us that is different to a traditional GIS, SDI based approach? Now, I would argue that maybe that value proposition is that you can kind of do a lot of those things that you would currently need to do a GIS query or to develop an SDI to do without the SDI, without the GIS, because you're adding a little bit of geospatial knowledge to the web in general. That would be my proposition. That would be my way of describing what linked data gives you. Is there anyone else who's got something more compelling than that? Because that's what I kind of take it to be.
Well, the reason why I'm interested in linked open data, by the way, my name is Koen Rutte and I work for the Dutch provinces, is the reason why we are interested is improving data quality. Spatial is given for us, but the attributes, the information you join at points or locations or lines, that's where linked open data is strong for us, because you can use shared definitions, shared terms. Because we work together with the 12 provinces, it's very nice if those terms and definitions are somewhere on the web and accessible for all of us. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe then part of the proposition as well is that linked data makes geospatial information on the web more accessible.
Is that fair enough? I mean, I think we need these kind of big picture statements because this is a new area. It's a new territory for us in the geospatial community to, and if we're going to convince our bosses, the guys that we work with, that we're going to take a slightly different approach, I think we need to be able to say, these are the solutions that this now allows us to prescribe and allows us to do things differently, more quickly, more efficiently than we could do before. Any other ways of selling this, perhaps?
Okay, I'm Benoit Borins, and I'm manager of the project in GeoClouds, which is an EC project where we implemented the linked open data, and we have a triple store there available on the cloud. I'm coming from a software company, and I'm let's say an integrator. And what I would like to point out and is the facilities for software developers, I would say, designers to use the linked open data technologies, because they are all web-based on HTTP stuff, URL stuff, URIs. And the mix of the fact that when you when you are querying a triple store, you have access at the same time at the metadata and at the data itself. So you can query the metadata very easily and in uniform way in comparison with what you have with a relational database, for example. So you don't have to care about knowing the relational schema that you are addressing, but you just have to, I would say, explore the graph that you are dealing with. So in terms of development and integration, this is, I think, for the software development point of view and integration point of view, the main strong point of using linked open data, independently of the usages that are behind that. Sorry.
So the discussion might think that what we're proposing here is sort of like a revolution of the SDIs. That is not what we're implying. It's not like, forget everything about the SDIs, this is how we're going to do it tomorrow. Far from. We have, what we're proposing or what we're discussing here is an and. So we have the worlds of the SDIs for sure, and we have the world of linked data. We're going to bring them together at some stage, but it's not that one is going to replace another.
Is it not? I think maybe it is more revolutionary than that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, despite me being there, I've got to try and be realistic and pull things back a bit. There's an element of me saying that, well, we haven't been super successful with SDIs at this point in time in making the information that we publish as accessible as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we do need to look at different approaches to make the data more accessible. And by more accessible, more mainstream accessible than traditional approaches. So maybe there is more of a revolution.
Yeah. Or there is a transition period, or I think both will continue to exist. But yeah, there are multiple ways
you
to...
can still use a horse and cart.
Yeah, the horse like the Ferrari, right?
It will be the community that decides.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I think, in the workshop, we had quite a range of presentations from...
Yeah, it says use the mic.
Does it? So it does. Yeah, okay. Wherever it is. So we had a range of presentations within the workshop, and there was kind of extreme ends of sorry, I'm going to say it here. It was getting to the kind of extreme nerdy end of technology in some cases, and there was a lot of hesitancy from some people in the room around the kind of some of the kind of leading kind of cutting edge possibilities, as opposed to there were some real practical examples of how stuff is being done that actually works, that was demonstrating operational outcomes for public sector and non-public sector organisations. And I think what we want to do is to kind of see some of those real examples come out to try and say, this is the, as an organisation making the decision about what you need to do, these are the things that are small introductory steps that can make the data more accessible, can start allowing you to still do some of the traditional approaches and make it available to particular people, but you've got this other community which it's much more web focused. We want to see this data being exposed to those people. We don't really want to be having those people using entirely different terms meaning the same thing. So this is about bringing people together, and it's a bit of a cliche. It is a journey, and there will potentially be changes over that time, but really it's about trying to demonstrate real outcomes that we want to get and kind of take that forward. Phil, you wanted to say something about this?
Show you this. This is one of the best use case documents I've seen recently. This is from the CSV on the web working group. They produced it pretty quickly. They only started in January, and this first public working draft, by the way, I think you too now, all our drafts, the editor's drafts are all public. Most of them are on GitHub now. But we have a formal, this is now a formal publication, which if you like is a snapshot. This was the first snapshot of the use case document produced by the CSV working group. The reason I'm highlighting it particularly, first of all, you may notice a friend of yours there, Jeremy Tandy from the Met Office, WMO, as one of the editors. But all these use cases, all 18 of them, unusually in a use case document, they all have real data. These are all absolute guaranteed, bona fide, real-world use cases. And in every one of these use cases, they actually link to where that CSV data is. They link to what they had to do to create what they wanted at the end of it. And it's a really heavily grounded use case document. And of course, everything that the working group is now doing is based on what's in here. And it's just to show you that the whole point about the UCR, the use cases and requirements, is it's grounding it in reality. And that's what we need to show early successes, to show that we're not coming up with theoretical things that may be useful one day, maybe. That's all.
I was say John's on the line and I think muted, so John has written a little message just for him. Actually, should we unmute John? Is that?
Mm-hmm. I can find my.
Yep. So John, you were making a point, and his mic's not working. Okay, right. I will. Thanks, John. So. Right, so John from Ordnance Survey, was just highlighting that for him spatial isn't special, and that really there's lots of different types of data that include location, and that linking to location is important in that, and some of those examples including that we saw at the workshop, so the BBC News, the Library of Linked Data, the Museum of Linked Data examples were all about trying to bring those things together and be able to potentially do some kind of more traditional GI analysis on it, but the kind of doing it within the web as opposed to kind of having to take it out and do it separately. And
can I clarify that those are libraries and museums that use linked data, not libraries of linked data or museums of linked data?
Yes, that is a good point, yes.
Museum of linked data.
It's a good idea though.
Good, yeah. That's my retirement project, yeah.
Okay.
So how far are we away from, do you think, being able to get a collection of use case requirements, UCRs, like the CSV guys have got?
Timeline for this, to be realistic, would be that Bart and I both have a process, an internal process we have to go through. If you're, what's your equivalent of an AC rep, the person you actually talk to within the organisation? There's a point at which both of us send things to our members to validate. Right. So we have the advisory council, which is every member has one person we talk to. And so we have to get the charter document to those memberships who have to approve it. I'd like to get that ready to go to the memberships, our joint memberships, next month. So today is actually really important to us as a step along that road, because we want to get information from you so we can get the charter as good as we can. If that goes to membership in July, we have to allow 8 weeks, blah, 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 blah. September is when the working group starts. To answer your question, Ed, I would expect a first public working draft, that is the first snapshot of the use case document, formally published by the end of the year.
Now, rather than from a sort of process step, I was thinking more in terms of, do we have knowledge of work that's already underway that would give us that kind of same level of content that the CSV guys have?
For that, we need community.
So that's the discussion that we started in Geneva. So again, everyone who has an interest in the public.
Is it just worth?
WTC or WTC, specifically on geosemantics, so we can actually
I mean, is it worth just in terms of questions to everybody here, who here or their organisations is doing linked data work in the geospatial area at the moment? Quite a few. So, and there were quite a few different ones at the workshop.
And who's interested in the future of doing linked data? Who sees this as part of their future? That's good.
Nothing to do.
Okay. Alex, can I have a scope question? Because I think it's one of the things is the main, I would agree for me also, the main output is the geodata on the web best practice. And that's a bit more general than just linked data. So I mean, it's a fine-grained distinction in a way, but I think it's a relevant distinction. And is the scope of that, for example, if you think about use cases for using geodata on the web, are you just thinking about linked data use cases? I think there's a wider web. I know that also GeoJSON LD, which is kind of linked data, but also GeoJSON. There are REST APIs listed, so that's a much broader topic. But I think that was for me also one of the things at the workshop that we had in London. There was kind of an oscillation between linking geospatial data, which you can do in a lot of technologies, and then when you look at the strict semantic web technologies. And I think to be successful, in particular if it's called geodata on the web, it needs to be more, it needs to enable also, I mean, I think it's probably a discussion on where to draw the boundary or where to stop, because otherwise you're doing everything again. But I think that needs to be at least clear, and that needs to be addressed in the whole effort.
I've got a definite answer for that. When we were on the phone, all of us, with John Goodman as well, working out what to call this workshop, we very deliberately called it the Linking Geospatial Data Workshop, because we didn't want to preclude non-linked data web technologies, of which there are lots. And everyone who came and spoke about it talked about linked data, except Clement. Okay. Who incidentally got the highest score and was the first speaker. I should just point that out. Actually, I should explain. My job within W3C is to coordinate working groups around data in general. The only reason I don't cover XML is because my colleague Liam Quinn does that, but everything else I do. So yes, I include semantic web, and I also include stuff that isn't, like CSV. So yes, we would be open to that, and yes, I think you're right, we should cover them in some way in terms of best practices, yes, but yeah.
To be fair, I think
that's sort of the revolutionary aspect for me comes in as well. Good point. It's more than just data.
Well, in particular, if you want to reach the masses, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how geodata is used on the web today, also with the very popular APIs, maybe there's some linked data under the hood, but we don't know it yet. And I think that's probably what you were talking about. There's a separation between what's in the background and then the JSON that you probably get at the end. And but I think it's an important aspect, and that also creates a lot of, I think that's part of the confusion. And when I just said I didn't include linked data in the presentation, that was deliberately to point out that there is a large community that wants to use the data, but doesn't really care about the technology, and many developers are also not familiar with that. So I think we need to address that definitely in order to reach some conclusions. But I think as you said, it's a simple mechanism, so it can provide a lot of guidance behind it. So I mean, the whole meta model that's behind it, I think that will be very helpful.
And I think, to be fair, and I sort of guilty of this as many, is I think the definite is what people mean by linked data is variable, and I think it can be quite specific about a particular way of doing it, and there is a sort of broader kind of slightly more encompassing approach, and I think I'm probably in the sort of slightly more encompassing approach. But and just because it's flashing at me to remind me, John had a question for you, Ed, was around there's a strong geo element to schema.org and the Google Knowledge Graph. We should be assuming that this is going to be important.
Yes, John, definitely.
Okay.
I don't know why am I talking to a laptop, but yes, John.
We're waving at the, yeah, okay.
No, yeah, no, I completely agree. That's really where we're coming from at this, and it does come down to Clement's point about the scope. We probably want a relatively broad scope with that kind of vague definition of what linked data is, but it is, from my perspective, it's data that's accessible using standard web methodology that you don't need to be a guru of a particular service to use. And we'll need to work on that scope clearly to move forward. But I think it is, it's not using perhaps the traditional approaches that we've used within the geospatial community, which are less accessible.
GeoJSON came up a lot in the discussion, and it's what people want to use, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's fine, and we love it to bits. And more or less at the same time as us working on this workshop, Sean Gillis and his colleagues who produced GeoJSON were working on GeoJSON LD. JSON LD, JSON linked data, is a way of taking a JSON file that already exists and making it it actually is. It's a full encoding of RDF, but don't tell developers else they'll stop using it. It's a full-blown. It's just like RDF XML. It's just like Turtle. It's just like N3. It's another encoding of RDF. So JSON LD is really important, and GeoJSON LD is now close to completion. They've already finished it. Now, the early version of the charter, and in fact the outcome of the workshop was, we, OGC and W3C together, will standardize GeoJSON. Yeah, they weren't very happy about that. So what we have to do is, I think in the best practices stroke cookbook, whatever you want to call it, I expect there to be recommendations on how to use GeoJSON and GeoJSON LD, because it's a very important, massively implemented technology. But there is a problem. I don't know how many of you this might apply to, but I know in the UK government, and Alex can confirm this, it's actually really hard for a government body to endorse the use of something that isn't an official standard, that hasn't been through a body like ours, or ISO, or whatever it may be. So it's really hard to include that in their procurement. So if you're selling stuff, if you're selling geospatial technology, and you say it's got a GeoJSON output, well, that's a really good selling point. But don't expect the UK government to pay any attention to you because it's not an official standard, which is crazy because everyone uses it and it's really good and you should use it. So how do we get around that? So we've got to sort of somehow include it in the best practices, and that goes a little way, but Hadley was telling me it doesn't get me far enough, on recommending how to use it. And so sometimes it matters that something's a standard.
Isn't it on an IETF standards track?
Not that I know of, no.
But I take a different perspective from this. We use GeoJSON increasingly at Google for a number of our products. The fact that it's not a standard defined by a standards body causes us no lack of sleep. We use it because it works and it's widely adopted, it's understood, and how you influence what happens in GeoJSON is clear and transparent. You become part of the mailing list. So we don't have an issue with that. I'd much rather we do our bit to educate governments to say, well, actually, this works. You don't need to standardize it. And it's not broken. There's nothing we need to fix. So I'd argue against us trying to take too much control over something that we have no control over, and we have no rights to try and express control over.
An independent, thank you. Here's an IETF. Well, it's independent internet draft. Doesn't say it's on the standards track, but it looks like it. So that's obviously going to be helpful. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's not from MIT, which is where my boss works. Okay, but not that I'm supposed to know about these things.
Yeah. Actually, the GeoJSON was a topic on last OGC TC at the closing, where there was a statement from the GeoJSON folks that whatever CRS that would be provided, they would always take it as a right-handed CRS. In some cases, you need a left-handed. And so there's already discussion in the OGC how we can turn a left-handed coordinate system into a right-handed so that we'd be able to use it. Anyway, if...
Right-handed,
Well, yeah. Tell that to the folks here in the room that use left-handed, but okay.
But I think in terms of summary, Phil, is that it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be particularly things in the cookbook and the best practice section that you would expect to see some reference to how to implement those particular pieces. Okay.
Yes. I mean, we do sometimes struggle, but we have a policy now on how we reference something that is essentially a community standard. Because if we couldn't do that, we could never reference robots.txt, we couldn't reference RSS, we couldn't reference all sorts of stuff, which are standards in any sensible meaning of the word.
Alex, one question on, because it was mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
you wanted to discuss that first.
So it was just in terms of moving on. I think probably moving on. Yeah. So we've kind of spent quite a bit of time on the use cases, and I think that's important. So one of the particular areas, and there's a little bit more text on the charter page, is particularly in terms of the sort of best practice, the recommendation. So this is the kind of standard type process within the OGC. These are the particular ones that kind of came out of the discussions at the workshop and some of the discussions that we've had since. So particularly picking those four, there may be more. Was that particularly what you had a question on? Sorry, comments.
I had a question or comment about the last one, because that goes back to the not start big new work. I mean, develop advice on RESTful APIs. I understand that. Define RESTful APIs with the time frames. Not sure, because that may be quickly a difficult area.
In the original, which includes some color coding, it's in the
yellow.
we may not do this bit.
Yeah. I know that.
I deliberately left that out. Okay. Yeah.
The first one should look very familiar with the abstract bit. So like
So, yeah, and so as Phil kind of mentioned in the kind of workshop, I think the discussion we came up with at least 5. I think it was maybe more. Yeah.
I mean, so how realistic then is that? I mean, how realistic is it? This is what, do you want to give my question? How realistic are these things?
Use my
Okay, I'm Andrea Pergo from Jersey. Now, about the first point, it is unclear based on the definition what we are going to do. It's an ontology for the geospatial domain, or something that can be also reused in other sectors and domains. And I mean, that one of the examples is the core location vocabulary that was meant from the very beginning to be reusable as much as possible. So it's also a problem of the design patterns that they're going to use for this ontology. Because as came out from the workshop in London, the first problem is terminologies. So we are talking about, we are using the same words with totally different meanings. So probably it's must be more detailed, this task, to understand how this will be developed. Like the idea of having a core ontology and an extension specific to given domains. And one, for instance, specific to the, just to give an example, the Isaac location vocabulary is now in the locations and addresses community group, and the responsibility of this community group, and the discussion that we had there was, okay, how we can improve it. And one of the options was exactly to think of extensions of this vocabulary, which is very simple, but encodes what at least at the European level are considered as the terms used commonly across sectors of the public administration. So I think this should be taken into account, because if you're going to define a very detailed and complex ontology trying to address all the requirements of the geospatial community, we are not able to make it reusable at all.
I think that's a very valid, very valuable point. I think maybe we can help this process by understanding the scope, which gives us the context for doing this. And I would say, you know, the scope here is maximum accessibility, a mainstream audience. So we try to aim for the lowest common denominator that's going to get the biggest accessibility win. So we end up making probably some compromises and ending up with quite a small vocabulary that we can agree on, and that's what we do to move forward. That would be my suggestion. The low-hanging fruit, and then we use that as a context when we're going through all of these, and we say, okay, will this work for 100 million people? And that's the sort of question we need to ask. So it ends up that we don't do things that are geographically specific or thematically specific. We try to get the low-hanging fruit.
So, conscious of time. So the next one was around advice on the use of URIs as identifiers within Geosystems, and this has come up obviously for at least the last 4 years worth of conferences around Inspire.
I will pay for that one. That's definitely worth money.
So how much?
200 crowns. That's all I had.
In fact, we have that element. If you remove the bit that says GI systems, that's a deliverable in an existing working group, the Data on the Web Best Practices Working Group. Basically what we're doing is taking the work that the UK government linked data group that Alex chairs, is the sole chair, that one, has directed and Stuart Williams has written. I mean, basically, it's do what it says there. But other people have other ideas, so we need to codify that. URIs are really good because you can dereference them and you can't dereference the UUID. I will keep saying it. And so just how do you design them for persistence so that you can rely on them in 20 years' time? That's an important note, by the way.
And I think, just in terms of the UK approach, is we're on the sort of second iteration of that, learning from some of the implementation lessons. So, and I know there's sort of other countries using the first version who've been feeding into that kind of change process that we're working in. I mean, I think it. I mean, from a personal point of view. Sorry. So from a personal point of view, I think that's really, it is an important area. I think it's something that's achievable, but it's not easy. But it is achievable. No, it's. Yeah. From the kind of next two, I think, were again things that had come up from quite a number of discussions. So providing different levels of metadata for different usage scenarios, and this is particularly recognising the kind of difference in the kind of, what we're seeing from the linked data community is around sort of building that into the actual data sets themselves, as opposed to the more traditional approach that we see with Inspire, with particularly discovery metadata sort of sitting separate from the data set. So.
And I think again, the context, the scope at which we're aiming this will help us to it. So to stop us falling down rabbit holes of describing metadata that's only interested to niche community. We want to focus on the metadata that is really important for that, broad adoption of these sorts of data, not ones that are only going to be of interest to a particular domain, for example.
So if somebody actually does want to be able to provide provenance metadata about every coordinate pair in a polygon, give us the use case, otherwise it ain't going to happen.
And prove that there's more than just you that has that use case.
Yes, yeah. You and two mates.
You and two mates in these.
Can we pass this over to Peter?
He was. Yeah.
I don't get my hand up fast enough for the dialogue. It's interesting watching the four organisers have their different views. Sorry, maybe I should, which is fine, perfectly reasonable. And John's probably steaming on the other. No, for those who don't know, I work with John Goodwin, who's the man hiding in the laptop there. Alex, you made a throwaway remark about how Inspire metadata is kept separate from the data, but they should point at each other with URIs. So how will that be different when if you encode your metadata in a triple way, it's always at the end of a URI. So I don't see it as hugely different in operation. I accept that you might not like the XML you get back, and we could encode it in DCAT or something instead. And that's a question, but not the one you're putting up on there. Now you need the microphone back before you can answer, though, don't you?
It's more a perception issue.
Hold on, Alex. Don't get start it yet. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we're getting some abuse via the. Yeah. So I think it's a fair point, and I think to some extent it's a perception issue, and to do with how the problem of how data is managed within some organisations. So that there is a tendency, and I'm thinking of my own organisation where there are the people who manage the data, and then there is somebody else who manages the metadata, and you get that as slightly less of an issue with some of the other things that we're seeing, and it's really about trying to kind of bring that together a little bit more. But yes, there are much that can be learnt from what's already there, and potentially it doesn't necessarily have to be such a huge step, particularly for organisations that are better at managing things.
We're the same as you.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. So I think, in terms of the challenge here, I think we've kind of concluded that these are sort of doable, and there might be some quick wins there. Do people feel this is harder, easier? Are there any quick wins within this?
You have your hand up? Yeah, I can see it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to somehow touch, I think, the first point, but maybe it's covering also some others. There is actually a recently ongoing quite interesting initiative under the, I think it's Arena framework, where I think JRC guys, they managed to get some people working on some study, trying to find out how to help the Inspire communities, mainly those who are planning to publish some spatial data according to Inspire requirements and recommendations. And I think there were quite interesting outcomes with the recent presentation made by Diderek Thierry. I think it was a few weeks ago through one webinar. And what was quite interesting for us was that within these preliminary results, one of the main challenge came that actually anybody who is planning to think about how to make their spatial data available also as a linked data, they have to also think a bit about the conceptual approach, how they are going to do this transformation. And to what I understood, there are already some other also ISO standards, which would be good to have a look. Even myself, I didn't manage to check some of those for this work on this point one. And also what we would appreciate as a data transformer or data publisher would be some advice, or actually we don't want to really compete in the sense that we want to have the replication of the Inspire data as a linked data, but what we would appreciate to make sure that if we will publish some data which currently we do have and in near future will be also made available as a Inspire data, what would be the easiest way how to actually enrich this content with some additional linked data content. And here I would go to the comment mentioned by Clemens, that not only spatial dimension, and I think there is a huge amount of information and content available on the web, which is currently available only through the linked technologies. And for us, this is very interesting potential. So if we are able under these 4 points somehow link what is done under this project to this group, I think it would be very useful, and definitely to get somehow these people together and maybe some brainstorm where they will finish and where this group can continue or build on what already they've done, because I think there is a lot of useful knowledge already collected, so why not to utilize it? Yeah.
And the outcome would be described in the cookbook.
Yeah, I think that just supports John's point, which was to say, that
that spatial isn't always special, and there are other ways that linked data is currently being published. It would be stupid of us to reinvent a geo way of doing it if there's an existing way that works. So I think that's key. Okay, we need to crack on, don't we?
We've kind of covered a little bit of this. So,
Alex, the last 10 minutes, if we can sort of
Yep,
discuss with the audience and kind of see
so,
what they want to.
so I think kind of recognising some of the things that the kind of Ed challenged us at the beginning, that these are going to be a little bit harder. I guess I think as a kind of show of hands, are these particular ones sort of top priority do nows, or are the, I guess, hands for do now? They're a kind of emergent issue for you, is it? Yeah.
Of time. We have problems with the representation of time. We don't have an agreed standardized way for representing time, but just spatial temporal coverage in metadata, for instance. So, I mean, I think that in that case we already have a number of requirements to be addressed and to be contributed to the people that will be working on the time ontology. This task will be done, but I think this is an issue, and not just for the geospatial domain, for sure.
It's worth saying on the time thing.
It's worth saying that the time ontology already exists in L and has done since 2006. It's published, it's stable, and a lot of people have used it and want to use it. And the question I get, in the role I have at W3C, is when the hell are you going to make it a recommendation? Just change it where it says draft to recommendation, and that's all I want you to do. Now, the problem is, as Andrea says, this OWL thing makes people think, oh, it's going to be really, really complicated. Well, so the community needs to have a look at it and work out if it does just want to endorse what's already there, or whether it needs some other kind of work on it. But it already does exist, and there's actually not it depends. It could be no work at all, pass a resolution, yes, it's done, or it could be more work depending on what we want. But it does already exist.
My concern is about agreeing on a way to represent time. So I'm not saying that we should have an ontology. We can also use literals. We just have to agree about how to use them. You know, so it's
And again, ISO has a whole thing on it, and there's loads of work on it. It's not new. So,
no, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I knew this was one of the
Careful. So I think, okay, so priority. The others, I think from the discussions is probably a kind of a slightly later priority. I don't think we're saying these are not necessarily going to go forward, but they're probably not the kind of where the lower hanging fruit is. Next steps.
Yeah, how do you want to speak to so we have a great opportunity to enforce
The first is to be in a working group in either organisation. So you know the kind of what's involved in doing it. Would it be in this one? Sorry, it might be one second.
There's more of a thought maybe to OGC, or maybe on the intersection of the two standardization bodies. And I had that when I was in Geneva last week, where there was some proposals for, I think, a new working group in the OGC to standardize user feedback forms, like Amazon ratings and stuff like that. And I thought, this is not geospatial. This is web. If anybody should standardize that, it should be the W3C or some other web consortium. So I was wondering if in the OGC, and maybe the W3C as well, there should be somebody looking at these kind of things, and before there's a new OGC standards working group working on something, you should really pass this check. Is this something really that should be done by the OGC, or should it be done in this joint working group or by somebody else?
Yeah. Well, within the OGC you have, within the OGC there's something like the Architecture Review Board, UAB, and they will look at that for sure. Yeah.
Maybe
Who had
question to ask.
Hold on, Red.
Yeah.
It's down there.
Maybe another way of putting the same question, I guess, is what would you see as valuable as the output? You know, as a consumer of whatever documentation, whatever reports that come out of this working group, what would you see as useful? What would help you in your day-to-day lives? What should we be working on creating?
Thanks, Ed. I'm probably going to, for me, I'm a kind of +1 to Martin's comment, in that a lot of the kind of Inspire data models and everything are all built on top of a core common set of base types. And for me, one of the issues that I'm struggling with right now as being an information architect at OS and designing all the new products is that I need a reliable, consistent way of, when I create a model, of being able to map that to a CSV representation, to a GML representation, to an RDF, to a GeoJSON. So for me, having some mechanism that is a standardized best practice on, if you're going to use this data type in your model, it's this in CSV, it's this in GML, it's this in RDF. That for me is extremely valuable.
And you're okay with that maybe being quite a lot simpler than what you currently do? Being, yeah. You see.
Well, there's the abstract spec, the 19107, that will start off from, that's pure in geometry. Yeah, it'll probably be more than this.
Any other outputs that you guys would think would be useful, valuable to you? Because we're not doing this just for the sake of doing it. We want it to be used and useful. Okay.
So Phil, was there anything you wanted to kind of say in terms of next steps? You've talked a little bit about the timeline, but are there anything we want from the group here? Sorry, Mark.
But you have to know where to start.
That's why I was asking that question of how far are we away from having a similar set of use cases in this kind of community with this technology. So Phil, you can probably answer that kind of process.
Right. Well, you're from OS, I believe? Right, so join the working group is the first best answer to that, because OS is a member of both organizations, so you're a prime candidate to be in the working group, or you or your colleagues, so that's the easiest way. However, if you don't do that, then every working group, I can only talk, Bart will chip in if this doesn't work for OGC. All our mailing lists are in public. There's a mailing list that is writable by the group members and readable by everybody. Another mailing list is writable by everybody, so anyone can write into one of our mailing lists. The working group must respond to every substantive comment they get. Trolls we can ignore, but you know that's how you do it. So if you submit a use case, particularly if we follow the CSV one where give us the data shows the real world use case, there'll be a response, and you'll probably expect to see it in the document
appearing in that way. So it's a very open process, yes. It must be open, otherwise there's no point doing it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Arvid Liltun from Norway. I've tried to relate this to Inspire, and of course it's a new area or field here, a new way of looking at issues, and for us or for me, we are thinking like metadata or and then documentation with data models, all these things. Then we have data deliveries and services, and maybe also to link your actions a little bit more towards these concepts that we use in our daily life. And I haven't seen the use cases, but I hope that it's of course end users, but maybe also, is it going to help any of the integrators or the ones are or the delivery organizations? Like I'm from a mapping agency. How does it help us? How does it help also the work on like data modeling? Because like in Inspire, yeah, of course there are some models there, but how are they interlinked, and how do people really see this? I find it that it's quite locked down in a box, and it should get out, and we should get more advice on how could it be brought out. But then the question to you is more towards Inspire. How will this affect? Yeah, maybe not the legislation itself, but the guidance on how we work. That I would like to know more about.
I hear roadmap. Yeah, so just reminding that we got 5 minutes left in the meeting, so I think we need to wrap up in some sort. But if you answer that question, how do we get from here to there? If it's from A to B or from A to B accent or whatever, I think it's, we need to sort of, I think we got it to a stage where we pretty much confused everyone in the room and sort of fuddled them a bit. But how do we move forward? What is the roadmap moving forward? And that should be a good outcome of this working group.
And I think that's particularly important for this community. You've invested lots of time and money and effort into being Inspire compliant. What we're talking about here, doesn't replace Inspire, but it's then another mechanism for taking some of that data and making it more accessible to other communities. So, yeah, well, yeah, in some ways, but absolutely, we take your point that there's value that needs to come from this in the form of some sort of a guide that says, okay, given that you've got all of this data, this is what you do to make it available using these technologies in very concrete terms.
It's nice, isn't it? Well, thank you, everybody. I think in terms of, I think one of the things we haven't actually mentioned, Phil, was just in terms of the lifetime of the working group. I think it's probably worth just
Lifetime.
how long the group would be expected to last for.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, okay. So, yes, I can do that. All right. So there are differences in the way that OGC and W3C operate. I'll give you an example. In the OGC, the chair or chairs of the working group are elected by other members of the working group. In W3C, the chairs are appointed by the director. It's actually part of the chartering process. So there's a difference there. We have compatible but different licenses. We have compatible but different systems all the way through. The MOU that we are very close to finalizing, that I assume will be public when we have finalized it, but we're not making public just yet, basically says if you are a member of one organization, if you're a member of either organization, you can join the working group. We could not stop any of our members, we wouldn't want to stop any of our members joining a working group that had our name on it, and I'm sure you wouldn't either. However, the whole point about this exercise is that it shows that there are two communities here. We need to bring them together. Therefore, we actually, ideally, want you to be in both organizations and benefit from the other things as well. So there may be, if you're a member of OGC and not W3C, we may put some limits on what other sort of W3C benefits you get, and I'm sure you would do the same with our members. That's fine. But to keep it simple, give you the Jason, you can join the working group if you're in either organization. So it has to go to our memberships, which we hope we will be able to do next month, basically before we go on holiday. That's the idea. And we can then, we hope, begin the work in September. Now, again, a difference between the organizations. We have one annual big get-together. You have 4. Our working groups meet when they want to meet, at a location when one of the members says, yeah, come to my place and we'll do it. You usually meet at the TCs that you have. So we expect to use one annual OGC big meeting for the face-to-face meeting, and our annual one, as those two as the face-to-face meetings, and in between times, weekly phone calls, and so on. Mailing lists, everything else, drafts on GitHub. The actual publications will be on both standards bodies with both branding on it, and that's the important thing. It is a joint standard, and it's designed to be that from day one.
Yep. So underline all that with that small caveat that within the OGC, it's the members that create the working group. It's not staff. So this is something that needs to go through the membership. They need to decide whether they want to have a SWIG, a DWIG, a subcommittee, whatever, agree on a charter that is brought to the membership for voting. So that's the, you know, but it's compatible. I think we can sort that out. That should be fine. So once we have that set up, and I hope to see, you know, most of you active in those community working, you know, to make this work.
It's worth repeating, we all say it all the time, the standards bodies don't write the standards, the community writes the standard, and none of it will happen if you don't join the working group.
Yeah, you're the ones who are going to do it. Yeah, just, you know, have that action item. It's a good closing, right? That action item is on you. All right.
Which was a good, sorry, it's a good point to kind of wrap up on. It was just a kind of, there is a relatively small window, I guess, to any more comments through this week in terms of bottoming out the charter. But it is a good point to start. If you're not the person who sits on these groups for your organisation, is to start talking to those people so that they're aware of this, ready for when this starts going through the different membership groups. Okay.
I'm going to be here all week. Going to be here all week. Yeah,
all week. Yeah.
So, you know, we understand that it could be a bit confusing and challenging, and you know, embrace it is going to be cool. So please talk to us.
Okay. Well, thank you all.